and I will pass this to my colleague Ryan to introduce the topic and lead us through.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ashley. Again, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about pollinators. My name is Ryan Watson. I'm the National Orchard Operations and Education Manager for the Giving Grove. And as Ashley had said, I am located in the Catskill Mountains of New York, a few hours northwest of New York City. And we are the Giving Grove. We are a national organization in 16 different cities with over 650 community orchards across the country. And one of the things that we do is to provide support and education for our orchard stewards to make sure that they can get the most out of their orchards and make them as healthy as possible. And one of those subjects that is near and dear to my heart and sort of deep in my family history, actually, is the story of pollinators. So I'm excited about sharing some of these super simple things that you can do in your orchard to make sure that we're getting the most fruit that we can out of our orchards, and also taking advantage of the opportunity to support the ecosystems in our local orchards, in our local neighborhoods, and to really provide some resilience. Super excited for everyone to be joining us here today. I counted at least 10 states that we've got, 10, 12 states that we've got already. So I'm gonna get started here. So some of the things that we're gonna cover today. So we're gonna go over kind of where we are currently with pollinators. We'll talk about some of these core basic concepts about pollination, providing habitat, how to provide quality food sources, talk a little bit about who the pollinators are. I know that this workshop was sort of originally titled as the Understory Management, but we're going to really talk about the whole orchard space and how we can utilize that space to be able to support orchards to maximize our productivity in the orchards and our ecosystem. We're going to talk about some of those practical tips that you can do to build habitat, hedgerows and beetle banks, bat boxes, bug snugs and brush piles, bare ground, insect hotels, cover crops, some of the understory plants that we can plant, the difference between planting native and nectaring flower plants, and then I'm going to give you some materials and resources that are going to help support that. The Xerces Society is going to be a fantastic resource, and they partner with the NRCS, the National Resource Conservation Service, under the USDA. So with that, let's get started. And I wanted to start off with this question. If you think about who is pollinating your orchard, and I'd love to have you put that in the chat, shout out some of these answers of who is the biggest pollinator that you're thinking about in the orchard. When you think about that springtime, when your blossoms are opening up, when your trees are just coming back awake from wintertime, who are we trying to support when we're thinking about those pollinators in the orchard? And I wanted to share as we get started here. Let's see here. I'm going to share this video. And this is a video that I took from the spring of the pollinators in our orchard, just underneath one of these Japanese plum trees that we had, just to kind of give some inspiration to what we're talking about today. And to look at, who do you see kind of flying around here? This is a nice, beautiful spring daytime, but this for me is a really magical thing, to stand underneath a tree that's in full bloom during springtime is just really sort of a special thing to see. And to witness that symbiotic relationship that we're starting to see between the pollinators and our trees. Oh, there it was. Okay. All right. So before we get started here, we're going to go a little bit over what is this process of pollination. So essentially what we're talking about is how the process of a flower becomes fertilized and turns into a fruit. This is what we refer to as cross-pollination. So the flowers that open up in the springtime, they need some help to be able to create those fruits. Most of them won't be able to do that on their own. In fact, 85% of flowers require pollination to create their fruits. So this is that symbiotic relationship. It means that the plants are getting something in return for their cooperation with the pollinators. And in return for the pollinators providing that cross-pollination, the pollinators are receiving food. They're receiving that in the form of pollen. So if you look on bees or on insects that are flying in the orchard, you'll see their bodies are covered with pollen, little yellow grains. Those also serve as proteins for them. One of my favorite things to do as a beekeeper is to sort of watch the pollen sacs of the bees as they fill up. It's a really exciting thing to see the way that bees collect the bees and insects collect this pollen. They get it all over themselves and then they visit flower to flower, and that's how we get this cross-pollination. One thing that I wanted to point out here is there's a SARE grant, a SARE study, which is a research entity of the USDA, that showed that blueberries planted adjacent to perennial wildflower strips had berries that were 22 to 40% heavier due to the enhanced pollination of the wild bees. So this is, we're thinking about a lot of different things here. We're thinking about how we can improve the quality of our fruit, making them bigger, how we can improve the quantity of our yields by pollinating more of those flowers, and how we can really create the things that those relationships need to thrive in our orchards. And one of the things that's really cool about this, and I have a deep love for apples, and apples require cross-pollination between two different varieties to create their fruit. And the way that this happens is through this relationship with the cross-pollination. And as a result of that, each apple is not true to seed type. So because of that cross-pollination, you get a wild diversity of apple varieties that come about as a result of this symbiotic relationship. That has enabled us to grow apples across the entirety of the world, really. Even in Africa now, there are great varieties that do well in that heat. And that's as a result of this cross-pollination. It allows for that diversity of the apple variety to adapt to different areas in the world. So, our current state of the pollination. Pollinators across the US are in rapid decline. And you see this figure here from the Xerces Society of the percentage of decline, the percentage of potential for extinction of some of these pollinators. And this is happening principally due to this loss of habitat, development, deforestation, just losing this native habitat that a lot of these bees and insects rely upon. The use of pesticides, so using planting plants and chemicals that have those plants on them. The bees are attracted to those flowers. They visit those flowers. Then they, or bees and other insects and other pollinators, they visit those flowers and then they ingest those pesticides. It causes them to die. This is certainly a challenging thing that we have, but what we're trying to do here is to provide refuge from that pesticide use, lawn chemicals and things like that. Our changing climate is causing a lot of stress to the pollinator populations as well, and part of that effect of the changing climate is the impact of parasites on our orchard spaces. The parasite, so one major parasite that we see in honeybees is a type of mite, very small little red insect. It starts to multiply in the colony. It causes them to die, essentially. The colony will lose its strength and won't be able to survive the wintertime. And so many pollinators, especially native bees and butterflies are listed as endangered species. And so what we're going to be able to do to see from where our current state is, to be able to try to think about how we can make some changes in our management techniques to be able to encourage those pollinator species to be on the rise. So a couple of these core concepts that we're going to talk about here that'll be important in thinking about how you're going to implement these management styles. Providing food sources and habitats. This is really a key thing to making sure that you have pollinators in your orchard. One of these concepts is called succession planting. So succession planting is kind of a term that we use in farming so that you have a continuous supply of the food crop. And we're thinking about that in the same way in terms of providing that continuous supply for our pollinators. So making sure there is an abundant source of pollen and nectar, also insects that those pollinators feed on as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about that too. This idea of succession planting also, I would state, let's think about not just plants that we're planting in our orchard, but also the native trees and flowers that are around as well. The idea that we're trying to think of here is what flowers before and after our fruiting trees to be able to supply that continuous source. So in order for them to want to stick around, there's got to be a continuous source of food throughout the seasons. And one of the best ways to be able to do that is to be planting native and keystone species. Native species, we've heard a lot about native plants, and there's a lot of different regional native plants, and we're going to talk about some of those plant lists a little bit later here. This idea of keystone species as well is native plant species in your area that are supporting a large number of different species within your area. So often that's like an oak tree, or some of these flowering trees provide a lot of support for pollinators in our area. And this idea is what we're trying to do here is to plant these as close as possible to our fruit trees. Now I know management in various different sites is going to be different from place to place. You may not have control over some of the spaces in your orchard, but our goal here is to increase that effect. The closer we can plant those plants, the better they're going to be. Another one here, and if you attended our workshop on cover crops and soil fertility, this is also a key concept. If you didn't, there's a recording of it, so go back and check that one out. This idea of minimizing ground disturbance. So not tilling that ground, not tearing up the soil. And that's because we have a lot of nesting sites for pollinators that are living underground. So one of these ways that we can support that habitat space is to leave bare ground, to leave some leaf litter, decaying logs, things like that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the future here. And then also to point out, many of these pollinating insects are doing double duty for you here. They are not only pollinating your fruits, but they are also eating the insects that might cause some damage to your fruit, to your trees. One really great example here that we know and love is the ladybug, who is they love to eat aphids. And you'll find them often on the undersides of those leaves. And you know that when you have that relationship happening, that's a great thing to see happening in our orchard, and that we're able to support them as a species. So some of these practical ways that we can support pollinators. What are these conditions that we can use to create that habitat? Diversity. Diversity, but you'll hear me repeat this over and over again in so many different workshops that we do. Providing a diverse range of habitats supports a diverse range of pollinator species in your orchard. And this is a really important way if you have some feelings about what's happening and the current state of pollinators or the current state of ecosystems being challenged, particularly in these urban environments, really super important as a lot of us are stewarding orchards in these urban environments. This is a great way to be able to make a change in that in that context. As I said before, this idea of succession planting, providing consistent food sources, that nectar and pollen throughout the entirety of the season. So while it's really super important that we're providing that in the spring when the plants are flowering, we also really want to make sure that we're having that throughout the totality of the season so that they want to stick around, right? Make sure that they know that they are welcome in our orchards and that we're going to support them. Uh, we want to use these different host plants for the pollinators throughout every season. These are going to create those spaces, the nesting and overwintering sites, and to be able to support the pollinators. This idea of leaving some things in the orchard for overwintering, I think maybe we've heard this phrase, leave the leaves. So some of these concepts may be a little bit contrary to our human desire to want to keep things very neat and tidy. That may not be the best way for supporting some of these pollinators in our orchard. And lastly here, to be able to provide protection from pesticides. So in the Giving Grove network, we really support people not using toxic chemicals that are going to have impacts on these pollinator populations. Using non-toxic alternatives. One of the sprays that we recommend is using neem oil, which does have some lower levels of toxicity, which is why we recommend to spray later in the day when these pollinators are not as active. But also there's some alternatives that you can use as well. These for Korean natural farming and other things that we've covered in these previous workshops as well. So go back and take a look at those. All right, so let's get into it. Native bees. This is the most important group of the pollinator species. There are more than 4,000 species of native bees in the United States. So this is including bumblebees and carpenter bees, miner bees. You see this picture. This is just of some of the bees in Eastern North America. There's such a diversity of size, shape, color. It is really a beautiful thing to watch how many different of those bee species you see visiting our orchards every year. And when we say save the bees, we're not talking about honeybees. And I'll show you a little bit further along here what that means and what we're talking about here. Most of these native bees, 70%, are nesting in the ground. So our soil management, our understory management, how we're dealing with the ground is a really important way to impact the most important orchard pollinators for us. These native bees are often working in cool temperatures, in wet weather. That is when we have the most challenging time to get pollination from some of these other species that are less likely to be working in that sort of context. Loss of nesting sites is that really biggest threat that we have to survival for the native bees. Another great group of pollinators, also a wide diversity, approximately 900 species of seraphid flies. We also call them flower flies or hover flies. So I think one of the things that's really great that I've been putting together in this workshop is like being able to go back out into your orchard and observe. I think as a society, we sort of say, oh, those are bees, or we'll call, wasps bees, or we sort of use bees as a blanket term, but there's really a lot of different species, really thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of species working in our orchards across the United States. Again, also working in that cooler weather. Their primary habitat, again, in the ground, in that leaf litter or in soil. So in leaving that is really super important. And here's when you get that crossover. These seraphid flies are predatory insects. They feast on other insects. So like aphids that are doing some damage into the fruit and the trees in our orchard. Another favorite of the pollinating species, butterflies and moths. This was kind of mind-blowing for me to do in this research. 180,000 identified species of butterflies and moths. And one of the things here that I made sure to point out here, identified. We are constantly discovering new species in this family. So there's an actual estimate of somewhere around 300,000 species that are um, existent in just a little bit more than half of them we've identified. About 20% of these species are endangered of extinction. Again, loss of habitat and lacking in those food sources. Milkweed, I'm going to give a special shout out to, has a very special plant in my heart as a specific plant that the monarch caterpillars only will lay their eggs on. And there's a great Xerces Society plant list specifically for improving the pollinator habitat for monarch species across the country. Another one, wasps and beetles. I think we might have some conceptualization of the wasp species from the more aggressive ones that are stinging. The ones that we're talking about here are non-aggressive towards humans. They just want to do their thing. They want to visit the flowers. They want to pollinate. That is kind of what they're interested in. They're not really interested in us. So what we can do here to support them is to give them those materials to build those nests of soil and grass. They're feeding on nectar, working in milkweed, in the flowers in the sunflower, carrot, and mint family when we're not working with some of these native species. I had to give a shout out here. Though most of us, the bats are not directly working in pollination unless we're fortunate enough to be in that warmer section of the country in the south. But without bats, we would not have tequila. We would not have mezcal. There's mangoes and bananas. That agave plant needs those bats. They are a nighttime species that feed on that flower. And particularly here, bats can eat up to 600 insects per hour, including codling moths, which can be a really damaging aspect to our orchards. We just came from our annual conference in Seattle at the Tilth Alliance, and we see the way that they are doing a lot of effort to net their trees to exclude the codling moths. We were fortunate enough to get a tour for bats from our friend Elise at the UK Orchard Project. Orchards are also great habitat for bats as well, because those fruit trees age, their bark gets craggly and has a little bit more space for habitat than those deciduous trees, so providing that shelter. So we really like to see those bats working in the orchard. And I'm going to put this one last. Honeybees. So honeybees are a imported species from Europe. They are an agricultural species just like livestock. I think if we start thinking about that, just like we think about cattle or we think about horses being introduced from Europe, this is kind of how we should think about honeybees in the orchard. Now, that being said, honeybees are a key pollinator in our agricultural system. They give honey. They live in large colonies, but they are very finicky when it comes to weather. If it's raining, if it's not too warm in that springtime, like we had this year, we had a great season for pear pollination, really nice weather. But then a couple weeks afterwards, we had some not so great weather. lots of rain, lots of clouds, so we didn't have such a great pollination. But the reason we hear so much about bees is because in our agricultural system, they are able to be moved in different contexts. Bees will travel by truck at night. Entire colonies and hives will move from place to place. But you can't really do that with these solitary native bees. So what we have to do is support them in their habitat. There we go. So some of these practical ways that we can go about building habitat for those species that we just talked about. And maybe I'll see here, are there any questions that we have thus far about some of those species that we just touched on before? All
There
right.
were Ryan, there were a couple questions, but we're answering them in the chat. So continue to add your questions to the chat. This is a time when you can get your curiosity sated. So write those questions and we'll make sure that we answer them.
Fantastic. And also I should give one other shout out here, specifically for the pawpaw. Pawpaws are pollinated mostly by flies because they're sort of attracted to this kind of rotting meat stench. So in some orchards, you can hand pollinate those pawpaws, or some folks will leave rotting chicken skin or things like that to attract those flies to be working on cross-pollinating those pawpaws.
Ryan, we have a good question here about the role of ants, which are abundant in my garden. And the question is kind of, are ants good or bad?
Now that is kind of a good question. I think some of that is the answer to that is going to be it depends. One of the really interesting things that ants are known to do, just like us, is that they are known to farm some species of insects. So those ants uh, will farm species of honeydew producing insects. So that's sort of insects that live on the undersides of the leaves. Maybe you'll see with aphids. Those insects are sucking the sugars out of our trees, and then they provide this substance we call honeydew, that is that sticky, sugary substance from the trees that is uh, uh, giving them a food source. So in that context, not really one of the greatest things. I'm gonna have to do a little bit of double checking there to see if there are some beneficial aspects. If you know of them, give them in the chat and shout them out.
Someone was asking if they pollinate jujubes, and they do. That is, they're one of jujube's pollinators.
There you go. So that's definitely going to depend upon some of these specific varieties that we have in our orchard are going to have some of those specific pollinators that are kind of a little bit, there's just so many to mention in going through this workshop here. So, all right. So as he said, and that's a perfect way to segue here. The type of habitat and the type of pollinators we're trying to attract is going to depend upon the species. So where they're going to be living, and then which trees are going to utilize which pollinators in the best way. And some of these common habitats that we're going to be talking about is ground-dwelling insects, these nest-building pollinators, and also those that live in these hollow tubes. So certain plants that are going to provide that space, those open cavities for the insects to build their nests in. Some of these project examples we see here on the right that we're going to go through are really great ways to be able to provide that space and that habitat in our orchard. All right, so this idea of hedgerows goes back 4,000 years in the UK. This idea of creating a small area of shrubs, small flowering trees, perennial plants along the edge of our orchard space. So this goes back to this kind of peasantry farming idea in the UK, and they would sort of cultivate leave these areas wild along the edge of the fence line. And that's going to have a really big impact in terms of the way that the pollination happens, and the types of species, as we saw before, with the improvement of the size and the quantity of those blueberries, for example. Really something that's a great way to do. Now, this might be a little challenging if you're working in a space that's not, under your management. One of the ways that you can plant something similar to that is to do what's called a beetle bank. These are also really popular in Europe. You'll see that picture there at the bottom. This is just a raised strip of soil that's got a bunch of different pollinator species, sedges and grasses, really wildflowers, shrubs. Again, diversity of plants equals a diversity of species of pollinators. Um, so again, and I'll give some PDF resources at the end here that show from the Xerxes Society how you can build a beetle bank in your orchard.
Ryan, some the in the chat questions about how close trees need to be to these spaces or plants for them to be beneficial.
Absolutely. So the rule of thumb here is the closer you can get them, the more impact they're going to have. The farther away they are from our orchard, the less impact the lesser impact they're going to have. So what you'll see here is we're going to talk about a bunch of different strategies that you can utilize in your orchard space. If it doesn't make sense for you to have those spaces planted real close to your orchard, or you don't have control over the management of that space, some of these other tactics are going to be better for you to lean into. This is really going to depend kind of upon what your space is, kind of what some of those things are. And we're going to have some time to kind of think about that in a little bit here. All right, so one of my favorite, most creative projects that you can do with partnering with other local organizations, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, local 4-H clubs, ecology clubs within your community. Kids love building these insect and bee hotels. And again, as I said, diversity of materials is going to influence the diversity of the insect and pollinating populations that are going to show up. So utilizing a lot of these resources that have those empty small holes in them, brick, bamboo, stone, straw, grass. We see all kinds of different spaces here. And a lot of the materials that you can use here are gonna be from waste materials. You see at the bottom here, there's a pallet on the bottom. You can find a lot of these things resourceful within your orchard space. You may even be able to grow some of these things within your orchard space to be able to do that double duty of providing you that material and also providing that orchard space. These insect and bee hotels also are providing us with protection from rain as well. And another shout out here with the bat boxes. Again, another really great way to partner with local organizations, build those bat boxes. You can also get lots of grants and things like that to be able to provide some funding, working with local woodworkers to utilize some of these scrap pieces of wood to be able to provide that habitat for the bats.
Ryan, there is a question about the bee like the bee boxes and native bee uh, houses. So sometimes those can like grow bacteria where things naturally break down. And I know you're going to go over some bee snugs and other areas that you can do that with, but is there any danger to putting a little bee hotel or something like that in your orchard um, if it is growing bacteria or fungi?
I mean, these sort of things are kind of natural in our environment. I think what you can do at the end of the season is to kind of clean them out. To if as long as there's if you don't have anything kind of overwintering in those spaces. But a lot of these pollinators are kind of working in those kind of natural environments already. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Um, so one of these things that we need to leave that's super important for some of these species, as we said, one of these the sections of native bee species, the Andrena bee, miner bees, they are tunneling underground. Also, bumblebees. These are especially great pollinators for those early season pollinators for cherries, plums, stone fruits. Hollow stems, logs, and stumps. So here we see a couple of different examples of these different types of habitats. We've got some bamboo stems tucked into the corner there. Some of these old uh, hydrangea stems we see burrowed in there. And then as well, leaving that log. So beetles are going to create those holes in there. That's going to create that future habitat for native bees. And leaving those materials in our orchard during the winter so that those species have a place to be welcome during the winter time. Now, one of the simplest and most effective ways to support your pollinators is to build a brush pile, or a bug snug is maybe a little bit more nice to the human eye. But essentially what we're doing here is stacking branches to create that insect habitat. You're also gonna get a double duty thing here as well, is that you're going to be able to create more organic matter for your orchard. This is a great thing to put in the corner of your orchard on those woodsy edges. And a note here that it may be helpful to put some signage in front of these so that you can inform people why it's there, and because it might look a little messy, right? But what we're really trying to do here is to provide that diversity of habitat. Once we have that pile of branches, that pile of debris from the end of the season, or during the season, this is going to create habitat for small mammals, for other sort of invertebrates like earthworms to be able to break down that organic matter. And now what I'd love to do is to take a couple minutes here and grab a piece of paper and write down your plans about how you would put some of this habitat into your orchard. Where are you going to put it? What types of materials would you use? When would you be able to do this? Does it seem like something that you'll be able to do today? Does it seem like something you'll be able to do next week? Do you want to do it with another overlapping group? And what would your sign say? What would you like to share with your community to educate and inform them? So let's take 2 minutes real quick here and just think about and visualize what that habitat creation is going to look like. And if anyone has a drawing, I would also love to see if you'd be willing to share and show that on your screen. It would be great to see what you think you'd be able to include as a habitat for your orchard. I'll take just another few seconds here. All right. Anybody feel like sharing? Okay.
Do you want to give an example of sharing of what that could sound like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you have that drawing, if you had been able to think about where you're going to put that, what materials you might use, what you might want to share with your community. I probably should have drawn mine up for you guys as well.
I know I started to draw mine, but I'll share that one of the orchards that I steward in Kansas City is in a park. So it's a municipal park, and we have about 13 trees. And along the backside of the orchard, there is like a wooded area. And I think that would be a really good spot for like a brush pile because it's kind of would fit naturally in there. But it would be fun to put a sign right next to that to tell people what it is. And I would probably make a really easy sign, just write it out or print it out and put it on paper, maybe slip it into a Ziploc bag and um, tape it onto a stick that can go right over there to tell people what it is. But that is how I'm thinking about doing something like this because there aren't many natural brush piles over there.
That's a great way. And Beth shared in the chat that she would put at the end of the blackberry currant strip. But since they're on school grounds, to build a frame around it, do something that's kind of like that uh, um, that bug snug to make it look a little bit neater, so that we can be happy with our human neighbors as well. All right. And just in the interest of time, I'm gonna keep on pushing through here. All right, so some of these food sources we've talked about for supporting pollinators, we want to make sure we're providing those nectar, those pollen sources, those insects, and again, making sure we're providing that consistent food source, the succession planting, aiming for at least 3 species per season, 3 different plant varieties, flowering trees, flowering shrubs, that are going to be able to provide that that pollinator habitat, as well as the goals of the food source, or sorry, as well as from as many different plant genuses as you can. So that's, again, going back to that diversity as well. And so thinking about some of these plants that we're trying to use to support our pollinators. So first and foremost, herbaceous and woody native plants that are working in your region. And Ashley is going to put in the chat a list from the Xerxes Society that has a list of all of these different types of pollinator list specific to your region. So this is going to make it really easy for you to identify what those native species are. On those pollinator lists, they have some that are bolded. Those are going to be kind of those highlight species that they are going to find to be the most effective in supporting that diversity of family. Planting as many different planting from as many different plant families with different colors, shapes, heights, supporting biodiversity. Again, diversity in all of these different spaces that we're working with, including native grasses and sedges as well to provide that overwintering space, as we said, the beetle banks, and we'll provide some of those detailed instructions to build those bug snugs, to build those brush piles in the end of the workshop and in our notes as well. And then additionally, flowering herbs, vegetables, and annuals are a source of food for those insects and those pollinators. But really, as we said before, we're trying to prioritize those native plants so that they support those native pollinators, so we can improve on that decline of the pollinator species. So again, those keystone species. A shot here of Echinacea, one of the ones that's my favorite, also has medicinal qualities as well. So with a lot of these plants, you're going to be getting double duty from them. They're supporting pollinators and as well as doing a list of other things. So one of the things we talked about in our soil fertility workshop was this idea of cover crops. These are plants that we can grow in place in the base of our orchard to improve different aspects of the orchard. So improving soil fertility, building that organic matter, which is going to be that future source of food for the soil, suppressing our weeds, improving soil structure, and of course, pollinator support here. So we see this is a mix of clover and vetch. Those are great things to use in the base of our orchard. Flowering plants like oregano, creeping thyme, strawberry. Yes, and at the bottom there or in the chat, Ashley is also providing that link for the cover crop selection tool, which is an awesome tool. Unfortunately, if you're on the sort of west side from Texas over, it's not going to be as dynamic for you specifically, but it's going to give you a precise list of plants that you can use in your region that are going to match with the different goals that you have. Another one of these ideas that we have here, if you have a little bit of leeway to be able to plant underneath your trees, is this idea of the tree guild. Go back to our workshop on soil fertility as well. We get a little bit more deep into these different functionalities of these different plants that you can use here. Really lots of different things that you can use that are edible, that are medicinal, that are going to be providing soil fertility, place for pollinators, ground cover. This is that diversity that we're trying to build into the orchard floor. So I'd love to just take a quick moment. Ashley's going to throw this link here in the chat for a Mentimeter to just put down some of these ideas, these 3 different ideas of plant techniques and materials, things that you can use to support pollinators in your orchard. I love these word clouds because it allows us all to kind of contribute from our different standpoints and our different orchard spaces. Again, the diversity of the species that we have also matches the diversity of the orchard management techniques, the different ways in which we're all working across the country. We may be in our own individual spaces, but we see here in this collective space how we're having a really great impact collectively on supporting pollinator species and providing more biodiversity to support these declining populations. Just take a minute here to let you input that in there. Really appreciate your input, and I'll send that out, that word cloud that we get as a result of all of your inputs. We'll send that out in the notes and see kind of what everyone is thinking here about how they can support that in their orchard. All right, so wrapping it up here, just to kind of go over some of these core takeaways. So make sure that we're providing habitats for our pollinators, spaces for them to have that food, that overwintering site, the space for them to be happy and thrive. The way we do that is by planting native plants and utilizing native flowering trees, grasses, sedges, that diversity of plants to be able to support the pollinators in our orchard. Again, diversity of food sources is going to mean a diversity of pollinators, which is going to mean more fruit for us, bigger fruit for us, healthier ecosystems on the overall. Making sure to leave that diversity of habitat spaces, bare ground, piled branches and debris, hollow sticks, stumps, that leaf litter, building those brush piles, building those bud snugs, and reducing that use of pesticides, lawn chemicals, and using those non-toxic alternatives by providing that space for some of these pollinators like bats and insect-eating pollinators. That's going to really kind of create that full dynamic system of supporting biodiversity in our orchard. And you see at the bottom here, this is a great combination of all these kind of different practices in order. They don't have to be really complicated. It doesn't have to be something that you really have to even spend that much money on. And if you do, there are lots of great resources to be able to support you in that. So 2 books that I would give just great shout outs to, super, super, super effective, is Attracting Native Pollinators by the Xerxes Society. Also Farming with Beneficial Insects. That's going to be a little bit more in terms of providing that space for predatory insects. The Xerxes Society has got a ton of great PDFs on how to practically do this, on the different types of plant lists that you're going to be able to do. A shout out to Prairie Moon Nursery. They're going to be a great resource for native plants and seeds. And right this time of year, as we start to get into fall, planting those wildflower perennial seeds now in August, September, October, kind of depending upon where you are in the region, in the country, right before those rains is going to really help to create that pollinator space in the future seasons. Take advantage of those low temperatures as they start to come in, get those plants started in the fall now, and then they'll be ready to take off in the spring. That Northeast cover crop selection tool, take a look at that. It's a great interactive way to look about improving your soil fertility and looking about using those plants in your orchard space to be able to diversify the pollinator species and native insects. And then also a shout out to a great article in Good Fruit Magazine, Putting Bats to Work, and goes a little bit more into the details of using bats in your orchard. So thank you so much for joining us. Ashley is going to share in the chat there with you our survey from this workshop. It really does mean a lot to us to get your feedback. This helps us to do future orchard trainings, to know what kind of topics you're interested in, if this was helpful for you, how we can improve them moving forward. And then also wanted to give a shout out here for our next September workshop and our upcoming workshops. We're doing monthly workshops, and that next one on September 11th. I can't believe we're already getting ready for our September workshop, and our harvest season is how to turn not so perfect fruit into treasures. So we're going to be working with Tom, a farmer from Fair Share Farm, and he's going to be sharing with you different ways to be able to utilize some of those fruits that may not be the perfect ones. They might have some insect damage, they might have some bruising or some kind of disease or fungal pathogens, but we're going to look at how we can still utilize them to turn them into vinegars, to turn them into jams, to be able to create that fermentation process, something that we talked about in those previous workshops about how we can improve those microbial ecosystems on our trees, but then also within ourselves as well. And with that, I think, oh yeah, look at that, right, finishing up right on time. Thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you again. We are the Giving Grove. We are so grateful for your support and for the things that you're doing to help support biodiversity across the country. With that, I'll turn it over to Ashley, and if anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, so stopping the recording.